Welcome to Levy's Customs! Today we're going to be taking a look at a pre-built computer that I have modified. It's an Optiplex 3010 from Dell. It comes with a Core i3-3220, which is a 3rd gen Ivy Bridge Intel CPU from about 2012 or so. It also came with 4 gigabytes of RAM, 250 gigabyte hard drive running at 7,200 RPMs, and then of course the case and then a crappy power supply. But thankfully, this particular version doesn't have the weird proprietary power supply like a lot of OEMs like HP, Lenovo, Dell. Their power supplies tend to have special connectors so that you can't just pop in a brand new power supply that you can buy like on Newegg or Amazon. But anyways, this one can, which is really nice. So with the power supply, I went ahead and swapped out the old one for a Corsair CX450 bronze certified power supply. So 450 watts, 80 plus bronze certification just means that it performs the most efficiently. Like the efficiency of the power supply doesn't go below, for bronze, it's like 83% efficiency minimum. Anyways, there's a whole system for that. Then I went ahead and bought a dual channel RAM kit from G-Skill, just their value memory. And I went ahead and put in a dedicated graphics card, RX 560 from AMD. This particular card is the PowerColor Red Dragon 4 gigabyte edition. This one, I found out later, only has 14 compute units, whereas the majority of all other 560s have 16 compute units, so this is a little less powerful than other ones. I didn't realize that at the time. I just thought it was part of the name. Some of these companies have really weird names. Anyways, I swapped out the stock fan on the CPU cooler for a blue LED 3-pin fan, meaning unfortunately it does get a little loud since the motherboard can't control the speed of the card, which kind of sucks because then the motherboard can't control the fan speed, so it does get a little loud, but it's giving maximum cooling all the time, so that's plus and a minus there. Anyways, the blue LED I think adds a little bit to the case overall, the overall look. Of course, there's no side panel, so you can't see inside while the case side panel is on, but there's little holes in the back and front and the side, and so you can kind of see the blue bleed through. The hard drive light LED on the case is blue, as well as the power button has a blue LED when turned on. I think it's like a yellow screen when it's on standby. Anyways, so just a little something to add a little flair to what I actually think are pretty interesting cases. OEM cases are generally very functional and very minimal because they're just trying to sell them. They're not anything fancy like a gaming computer. But I do like the design of this case. I like the silver with the black. I like the Dell logo on the front there. So anyways, the price of this computer without all the extras that I added was about $100 on eBay. Sometimes you can find them for a little less than 100 or more. There are i5 variants, so better processor variants for more. I didn't see how much they were. I just wanted to buy something cheap to kind of show it off and see what I wanted to do with it. So like my last build, I bought a lot of these parts a few months ago, and this computer's actually been up and running for a couple of months. At the time, the price for all the parts are as follows. The power supply was $40, the RAM, the 8 gigabytes that I bought was $40, the graphics card was $105, the solid state hard drive was $25, and then of course everything else that was in there just came with the computer. And now it's time for benchmarking. With this video, I'm going to be adding gameplay footage for each game. I figured this would help show how well the game performs instead of just showing a bunch of numbers. Because this machine is more of an entry-level build, you're going to see a lot of stuttering in these videos for benchmarking. And this also has to do with being set to the highest graphical presets for the majority of these games. Of course, if you lower your graphical settings, you will get better frame rates. First of all of these games are tested at 1080p, and for the most part, the highest presets available. Now on to the benchmarking. Our first game is League of Legends. We had an average of 94.9 frames per second, a 1% of 27.9 frames per second, and a 0.1% of 2.3 frames per second. Overall, despite the low 1% and 0.1% numbers, The game ran very well and I rarely saw any stutters. Our next game is Fortnite. Now, before we continue, I want to let you know that I don't play this game. The only time I ever play this game is when I benchmark for these builds, so I suck. Very bad, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So at the highest preset, we got an average of 32.2 frames per second, a 1% of 7.9 frames per second, and a 0.1% of 3 frames per second. Anyways, this game played okay at this preset. It was a bit stuttery when you first landed, and sometimes engaging in combat. I would definitely lower the graphics preset to something lower. Up next is CSGO, or Counter-Strike Global Offensive, at the highest preset. We've got an average of 87.5 frames per second, a 1% of 43.7 frames per second, and a 0.1% of 7.8 frames per second. This game ran fairly smooth, some minor stuttering here and there, mainly when there was smoke on the screen. Our next game is a heavy hitter, and that is Metro Exodus. For this game, I actually set it to the medium preset because I knew anything higher would have just been a stuttery mess. The average frame rate for this game was 49.5 frames per second. It had a 1% of 18.3 frames per second, and a 0.1% of 1.6 frames per second. This game honestly ran better than I expected. Most of the time, this game ran at around 30 to 50 frames per second, which for a more cinematic single-player game wasn't an issue for me personally. For Overwatch, we got an average of 40.7 frames per second, a 1% of 11.5 frames per second, and a 0.1% of 3.3 frames per second. This game played pretty well, but I would recommend turning down the graphics on this one. Online shooters can be more fun when they run smoothly. For Rainbow Six Siege on the Ultra preset, we got an average of 26.8 frames per second, a 1% of 3.8 frames per second, and a 0.1% of 2.7 frames per second. At Ultra settings, I had a bad time with this one, as you can see from the gameplay footage. With this kind of performance, it made it very difficult to play to the best of my ability. But let's try it at a lower preset. Now with the same game on the high preset, which I believe is 2 steps down, we got an average of 78.1 frames per second, a 1% of 46.7 frames per second, and a 0.1% of 12.3 frames per second. As you can see, by dropping the quality preset to high from Ultra, the performance is much better, though there's still a little bit of stuttering going on. For Grand Theft Auto 5, we got an average of 41.7 frames per second, a 1% of 20.9 frames per second, and a 0.1% of 17.6 frames per second. GTA 5 ran pretty well, pretty smooth, but I would still drop the settings so that the average is more like 60 plus frames per second. With this video, I'm actually going to introduce Cinebench to all my future benchmarks and everything. Cinebench is a really good way to see and compare how your CPU or processor compares to others. Because the CPU is only a dual-core hyper-threading, its score is kind of low. Things like Photoshop and Adobe Premiere, any type of multimedia creation, is probably going to suffer pretty bad because of this score. So the results for our Intel Core i3-3220 is a measly 639. Now if we compare this to a 7700K, which is a lot more recent Core i7 processor, we see a vast difference. Anyways, the 7700K got a score of 2,420. Overall, I really think this is a pretty decent entry-level gaming computer. Now, if you really wanted to get the most bang for your buck, then the used market is a great place to find stuff. Unfortunately for me, my life is pretty busy, so I don't have time to just sit and wait for really good deals to pop up. So for this build, I just bought brand new stuff. It's a little more expensive, but I think it performs pretty well. Anyways, guys, I appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.